Welcome to the CHCI Leadership Conference breakout session, Beyond the Classroom, Latino Educational Equity and Success. This session is possible due to the gracious contributions from our sponsors, College Board, the Walton Family Foundation, Keene University, and IBM. Our panel chairs for today's session are Representative Henry Cuellar of Texas's 28th Congressional District. He serves on the U.S. House Appropriations Committee and is the Chief Deputy Whip for the 117th Congress. And Representative Albiocides, who serves New Jersey's 8th Congressional District, is a member of 3 congressional committees: Foreign Affairs, Transportation and Infrastructure, and Budget. We will also hear welcoming remarks from Vincent Alvarez, the Associate Director of Student Product Engagement at the College Board. Our moderator for today's panel conversation is Marisa Lagos, a correspondent at KQED's California Politics and Government Desk. She is also the co-host of a weekly show and podcast called Political Breakdown. Please welcome opening remarks from Representative Henry Cuellar.
Hello, my name is Congressman Henry Cuellar. Thank you to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute for inviting me to deliver these remarks. As we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, we must call attention to the educational gap in our community. Hispanics will soon represent 30% of the American population. That is why investing in Latino student achievement, college readiness, postsecondary completion, and workforce development is crucial to the economic success of our nation. According to the IBM Institute for Business Value survey, 67% of Hispanics say they must work harder to succeed because of their identity. In fact, the Center for Employment Equity has indicated that only 4% of executives identify as Hispanic. Hispanics are underrepresented in high-wage earning professions. As members of Congress, we must support initiatives that close these achievement gaps. I will continue working to ensure Latino success in the classroom, on campus, in the workforce, and beyond. I thank the CHCI again for inviting me to be here today, and God bless you, and God bless America.
Thank you for inviting me to discuss equity in education for Latino students. As a former teacher myself, I know that education is the single most important investment we can make for our future. I also know that every student has enormous potential to achieve when they are given the right support they need. In recent years, Latino representation in school has grown, but gaps in graduation rates continue. Only 24% of Hispanic adults have an associate degree or higher, well below the 42% of all U.S. adults who have a college degree of some type. I firmly believe that if we make the right investment, we can close that gap and push the graduation rates higher for everyone. I still remember what it felt like when I first came to this country from Cuba at the age of 11. I arrived without speaking any English to a school of all native English speakers. I am appreciative every day for the teachers and coaches and friends and family members who supported me at every step. This Congress, I am supporting legislation which aims to end the Latino education gap. I am supporting the Diversity Act, which addresses teacher shortages, which particularly impact historically underserved students. By improving existing education grant programs, this legislation will lower the cost barrier to higher education for those interested in becoming teachers. Breaking down these barriers will create a more diverse teacher force, which will benefit a more diverse student population. I am also supporting the Pell Grants Preservation and Expansion Act. According to the Department of Education, almost half of all Hispanic undergrad students benefit from the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant provides critical support to those undergrad students as they study for their bachelor's degree. This bill will double the Pell Grant award and expand the program to include Dreamers. This legislation, along with other economic support from the American Rescue Plan, is essential to supporting students to achieve their true potential. There is so much more work to be done to address education inequity for Latino students. But I am fully committed to doing all I can to close the achievement gap. Thank you.
Clearing a path for students is not a fair weather mission. Our work is most vital when conditions are most difficult. At the College Board, we speak up for students who want to show their best work and claim the opportunities they've earned. But we don't do it alone. We take inspiration from students and educators, from partners and friends such as the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, and from one another. Every year, we help millions of students across the world stay connected and stay on track. We keep up with the fast-changing landscape and use our voice to push for high standards and high expectations. We created a program that gives millions of students the chance to tackle college-level work while they're still in high school, and with the opportunity to save time and money by earning college credits before they even set foot on campus. We changed the invitation to computer science, placing an emphasis on encouraging more students from all backgrounds to study STEM in high school and college, and to ultimately find their passion. We keep our mission in focus. We refuse to let circumstances get the better of our values, and we act. Nearly 1.5 million students visit our Go-To College planning tool every month on their computers and mobile devices to start their own path and find their big future. We all know each student's journey to college is different. Some go through twists and turns, and some go through unexpected places. So we launched a scholarship program that guides them through key steps in the college planning process, and have awarded more than 10,000 students a combined sum of $11 million along the way.
The College Board is awarding each of you a $40,000 scholarship to claim your big future.
Ganadores a nivel nacional de la beca de $40,000.
Together, we are the students, we are the families, the educators, the school counselors, all in one collective voice, saying that our work for our Latino communities matter, and matters most in times of need. But we're not done, and we will continue to work together to create new solutions, to share best practices, and to make a difference for more Latino students.
Hi everyone, my name is Marisa Lagos. I am the politics correspondent at KQED in San Francisco and host of the Political Breakdown podcast. I'm thrilled to be here today to moderate this important conversation titled Beyond the Classroom, Latino Education, Equity, and Success. Educational Equity and Success, excuse me. Thank you so much to both Representatives Cuellar and Sayers for your remarks, as well as Mr. Vincent Alvarez. And thank you to CHCI for providing a platform to discuss this really important topic. Latinos, just to set the stage here a little bit, are going to be 30% of the US population very soon, but we still face equity gaps in higher educational attainment and are disproportionately underrepresented in high wage earning professions. We're here to talk about why and how investing in Latinos, student achievement, college readiness and access, post-secondary completion, and workforce development is crucial to the economic success of our nation and our communities. We're going to talk this hour about innovative initiatives focused on closing the Latino educational equity gap in K-12 and higher education attainment, as well as programs already in place aimed at ensuring Latino success in the classroom, on campus, in the workforce, and beyond. And we'll, of course, be getting into how this past year and a half of pandemic has impacted all of these important issues. We also do want to hear from you, our audience. We actually have 10 minutes at the end of this conversation for your questions. So please submit them via the chat box. You can also continue this conversation online using social media hashtag CHCIHHM21. I would now like to introduce our expert panelists who will share their take on how we can address Latino educational equity. First is Michelle Siqueiros. She is president of the Campaign for College Opportunity. She's led historic higher education policy, budget, and legislative reforms in California, aimed at making it easier for students to transfer from community colleges to four-year universities, access college-level courses, and financial aid. Michelle, my California partner here, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Marissa.
Next up, Amanda Fernandez is CEO and founder of Latinos for Education. This is the first Latino founded and led national organization dedicated solely to creating leadership pathways for emerging Latino leaders in education and diversifying education nonprofit boards. Amanda, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Marissa. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I thank you for being up so early, joining us from California.
Oh, not that early when you have young kids, right? Dr. Sancha Gray is also here. She is Senior Vice President for Entrepreneurial Education Initiatives at Keene University. She previously served as the Superintendent of Schools for the Asbury Park School District in New Jersey and is a seasoned educator with over 20 years of professional service in the public school sector. Dr. Gray, thank you for being here to give us really an on-the-ground perspective on all of this.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Marissa, for that introduction. I'm delighted to be here and share in this conference.
And finally, but not least at all, is Lydia Logan, head of IBM's education and skill building initiatives that create more inclusive and effective workforces around the world. She also develops and manages strategic global partnerships with IBM's clients, nonprofit organizations, government, and content and curriculum developers that relate to education and career readiness. Lydia, we're so excited to have you as well to give us the private sector perspective on all this.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Really important conversation for us to be having.
So I'd like to bring everybody in, and we're going to start by setting the context here. Amanda, I thought maybe I'd start with you, actually. Can you give us a sense of what we're talking about when we say inequities in education, particularly for Latino students? Amanda, can you? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I think we might be having some sound issues. Amanda, just give us 1 second to get that. Michelle, can I bring you in here?
Yes.
I'll repeat the question. I was asking just like, what are we talking about when we discuss inequities in education, particularly for Latino students?
Well, we're talking about the quintessential, American dream that everyone should have an opportunity, that no limitation should be placed on anyone based on the color of their skin or their income or their zip code. And that the reality is that does not exist for Latinos. In California, as an example, over 50% of our K-12 students are Latinos. So what does equity mean? Well, over 50% of Latinos would be enrolled in all of our universities and community colleges. Over 50% or nearing that in the near future would be earning degrees and contributing to the workforce. And there's certainly no path to economic prosperity in California or in our nation without investing and ensuring that more Latinos are prepared for college, go to college, and graduate from college.
Right. Amanda, do we have you back with us?
We'll try again. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Do you want to tackle that question from your perspective? What are we talking about here?
Sure. So from my perspective, I think it's both a macro and micro level challenge when we think about inequities in education. We just heard that Latino students are not afforded the same opportunities as our white counterpart students in our education system. So we are not yet where we need to be. When I think about inequities, though, to me, it starts from the very beginning. When we think about access to quality pre-K education, we still have a disproportionate amount of Latino children who are accessing pre-K. And then the challenges persist throughout the K through 12 experience and obviously to and through college, as well as any other alternative access points. So there's just beyond that, even though the most basic needs that Latino students are not receiving. These are unmet needs. Things like the digital divide, I think, is something to tackle. That's sort of an outside force that has impacted these inequities in education. And at a micro level, I just want to point out one example of work that we're doing in Houston, where we're working with families and Spanish-speaking parents who are telling us that at the very basic level, we need our materials translated into Spanish. We need access to communication. We need the same level of information that every other family gets when it comes to our children's education. So I think we're looking at both macro and micro level opportunities to improve.
Yeah. Dr. Gray, I mean, is this, we know that generally in America, we do not do as well with Black and Brown students, with communities that have socioeconomic challenges. Do you see anything specific to Latino communities in your work? Particularly picking up what Amanda's talking about. I mean, language is always an issue for communities, right?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that context that both of my co-panelists have presented here, because the issue is really around access, opportunities, exposures, and experiences, right? And so what COVID has done is really cast a light on just how broad and expansive and detrimental the lack of those aforementioned are in and for our Latino community. Specifically, when I think about having previously led a school district during COVID and the challenges when we had to quickly pivot into this virtual space to provide instruction. Obviously, language was already a barrier, but access to technology was an additional barrier. And because, we're talking about homes where they may not have been technology from the beginning, then there's additional barriers that go along with that, which include it's not enough to just say, here's the technology, but then you have to provide the support around that. And then when English is not the first language, you have to make sure, as Amanda appropriately pointed out, that you have people who understand the technology and the language and can provide those ongoing supports. And so the first level of closing that digital divide is the technology, but always literacy is at the core and needs to be a driver for having that change in those conversations.
Yeah. Lydia, I would love to bring you in here and talk about how you see this playing out beyond college, obviously, in the professional world. Why is this important to you and IBM, and what particularly for the Latino community, do you see as the opportunities?
Sure, and hopefully, is my sound okay? I know there were some issues before.
Oh, it's still a little crackly, unfortunately.
Okay, let me try.
All right, we'll come back to you. Hold that thought.
Is that better?
Oh. No, shoot.
Okay.
Okay, we'll keep working on that. I definitely want to get your point of view here. Well, while we're waiting on that, let's go back to you, Michelle. You work to actually, change the process by which bigger systems like government are handling these issues. And I know in California, for example, there's been work you've done on removing things like SAT requirements for universities, things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that approach or others? Like, what kind of work, how are you all thinking about getting at this from sort of the top levels?
Well, I think it's important to make sure that, our environment is conducive to actually serving Latino students appropriately. And so what we do is we look at research and data, and the research and data tells us that SAT and ACT use in admissions has a disproportionately negative effect on Latino and Black students in terms of admissions. And it shouldn't be surprising if you know the history of the SAT, ACT. It was created with the very clear intention of being utilized to discriminate against racial minorities. So the fact that it still continues to do that doesn't surprise any one of us. What is surprising is that many institutions continue to use it in admissions. So we try to remove practices that we know are inequitable in admissions. We also ensure that, funding to support in our state community colleges where the majority of Latino students begin their higher education career are prioritized. And then we also pressure community colleges to do better, to make sure that the policies and practices they put in place don't just open the door for Latino students, but actually support Latino students to transfer, to earn a degree so that they can enter the workforce earning a living wage. We know that some of the practices of putting students in remedial education courses at the college level are disproportionately ineffective. They impact Latino students. My colleague likes to say that remedial education is where college dreams go to die, and she is not wrong. We know that unless, we put students directly into college level courses, provide them with the right supports, ensure that they're in a campus that's welcoming, that they see themselves amongst the faculty, that we address the lack of diversity amongst faculty and college leadership. All of those things are things that we can control. I often get very frustrated by the conversation that, Latinos are not prepared for college. It's a sort of blame the victim answer to every problem, when the reality is that there's a lot that we can control in terms of how we fund our colleges and how we run them to better serve Latinos in the United States of America.
For sure. I mean, Dr. Gray, you, I think, brought up the pandemic a little bit. Are there this was such obviously an uneven public health crisis, and again, communities of color, Latinos were hit so hard. On the other hand, you talked about technology. I mean, that was an opportunity to get technology to children who didn't have it before, and to get that digital literacy. And we've also seen unprecedented amount of federal funding pouring in to educational opportunities. So I wonder if you have any optimistic message for us about what we've learned over this past year and a half, and if there are good lessons to bring forward.
Absolutely. I want to just also pick up on the panelist comment prior, just prior, in terms of that innovation and that programming that's necessary to really support Latino achievement at high levels in the university space. I'm delighted to share at Kane University, we have a program we call Supera, and Supera is designed so that students are able to take all of their courses in their first year in Spanish, because you're correct. Remedial courses are not where we want to position our students because English may not be their first language. So we want to be able to provide them with that added comfort. Representation also matters so much, and making sure that there's faculty here, and our president's commitment in ensuring that there's a diverse faculty present really makes a difference. This year, we actually had 50 staff members come in, and through the fellows that have been incorporated here on campus, it really was an opportunity to highlight equity in action by bringing in Black, Brown, Latino, female professors and scholars in this space. So now to your point about the technology challenges, we also offer and have opportunities for our students here on campus, laptop loaners, because we understand that everyone may not have the technology, and I have it at home. And so we want to make sure that we give access at all times. It should not be about having the money or the fiscal resources to do it. Students can just sign in and out the devices. And obviously at the university, we also have those expanded offerings here where we can provide technology support. But in the K-12 space, what is critically important is when schools go above and beyond and provide that for their families that are home and need that support. And one of the ways that we were able to accomplish that is through video conferencing. Many of our families have smartphones, and so you kind of have to take baby steps in able to do that. The other thing that disadvantaged us in communities of color, particularly Latino communities of color and poverty, is the fact that during the pandemic, many of our students had to work. And so while other communities had the privilege to shelter in place, our students were on the front lines, having to support their families at a very critical juncture. And so those added supports and scaffolds to be able to provide instruction in the evenings and in the weekends is critical. And I hope that that is something that we have learned and will maintain post-COVID.
Yeah, that's such an excellent point. And Lydia, I think we're back. I want to bring you in to talk a little bit about this. And like, given the challenges that, everyone's laid out, then how do you do the work you're doing, which is to really build more inclusive workforces? And how are you thinking about that? Oh, we don't have you. Oh, we can't hear you. Dang it. Okay, Amanda, I do want to bring you back in here. And I know one thing that you've worked about and thought about a lot is the importance of representation, which has been brought up. The importance of having teachers that look like their students and communities they come from. What are the best practices for that? How are you seeing success in that? And what are the biggest gaps?
Sure. So we exist at Latinos for Education to really focus on closing that representation gap because we do firmly believe that representation matters. Our children need to be able to be who they can see in their classrooms at all levels. We've talked about it both from a K through 12 perspective and also higher ed. And so that needs to go throughout the educational experience of Latino students and also their families, because it really matters to families as well. So a couple of things that I'll say is when we were focusing on what do we do to respond to the pandemic and some very critical short-term things that we needed to do. I wanted to point out a best practice that I think we learned a lot from and that I think can be applied to the system. And then I'll talk for a minute about some policy work that we're doing. So as we might remember, during the pandemic, we were hearing all about learning pods popping up all over the country. And this idea of learning pods, though, were basically housed in more affluent communities. These were folks with resources that could pop up these learning pods, get a group of kids, hire a teacher, and they were able to keep up with their education. So here in Boston, where I live, I joined forces with 3 other Black and Brown leaders who serve Boston students. And we said, wait, we can do these learning pods for Black and Latino children in the city of Boston. But we want to start these learning pods in such a way that take into account the type of experience that we want our students to have, which is to have culturally responsive curriculum, to have meals, to have technology access, to have educators that look like our students. We were able to accomplish these learning pods and incorporate all of those best practices that we know work for Latino students in a traditional classroom setting. So I want to highlight the success of those pods because we had overwhelming satisfaction from families and our students who participated in the pods last year for several months. There's a lot to learn from these innovations that happen that can be applied to our K through 12 system that I would really love to see. There were also other innovations that we should be looking at as an opportunity to implement education in very different ways that really meet the needs and desires of our students and families. The second thing I'll say about representation. So we not only did the work of learning pods, but we said we need to start marrying the practice change with the policy change. Okay. What is policy change we can enact? So in Massachusetts, we've introduced the Educator Diversity Act, which I'm really excited about. I believe it's one of the first in the country that has the most comprehensive type of legislation that will remove barriers to more Latinos entering and staying in the profession. It's really important because we're losing Latino educators at really high rates. By the 4th year of teaching, educators are leaving in droves. 40% of our teachers leave. So we have to do both the practice change work as well as the policy change work. And I really hope to see the Educator Diversity Act in Massachusetts serve as a model for the rest of the country and for other states to adopt. So please be on the lookout for this bill and what we hope it can accomplish.
That's wonderful. Lydia, I think we got you.
I think we're back. You have me?
All right.
All right.
So yeah, let's circle back a little just on kind of how you're seeing this playing out in the private sector. And, because it is a challenge, I would think by that point, if you have kids who have fallen behind or haven't had the same opportunities. So talk about the work you're doing and how do you ensure that we actually close some of these gaps on that end?
Sure. We have a skills build program, which is an online learning program that offers industry aligned opportunities for students to explore STEM curriculum. Again, we were talking about the digital divide. So that is requiring students to have access. And we're working on rolling out some new options that would allow them to do work offline, because we realize that if we really are going to close gaps, we need not only online options, but offline as well. And for the adult learners, we also have content for them. We've had for the past 10 years our P-TECH program, which aligns school, an early college, high school model, and workplace learning. I think it's really important that we not just expose students to careers, but really give them some hands-on understanding of what it's like. So it's a combination of content, mentoring, and experience for them, and exposure to what it would be like to work in some of those careers. I know we're going to talk a little bit later about bridging traditional gaps, but I think it's
let's go into it, because go for it. We're happy to have you.
I think it's important that we are mindful of gaps. There are traditionally gaps between middle school and high school where we lose students, high school and college where we lose students, college and work where we lose students. So to the extent we strengthen up the handoff between those, and in some models, school models that we're seeing, for each of those, it's how do we make sure we are holding students and supporting them and their families, right? So whether that's through translated content, we have in both versions for students and for adults, or making sure that parents have access to information. I worked in the past with schools where rather than translating the documents, they had parent sessions in the evening online that parents could log into, where someone was speaking. It may have been a parent coordinator or a teacher in Spanish to them in their own language, whether you do that in breakout sessions. So there are lots of ways that we can bring families along, not just students, but I think it's being mindful of these gaps. So what we are really interested in is making sure students have the skills and abilities, and we've done our part to align those so they are really ready for real work, but also to get them from college to high school, from high school to college, and from college to work. And we do that through partnership as well.
Lydia, just sticking with you for another moment, how important is that family involvement and buy-in in your experience?
I think it's very important, because I think families need to understand and how important it is for students to do this work and what it means for their future. And in many cases, it's not just the future of that child, but the whole family. And so I think understanding the economic opportunity that comes along with education, understanding that students have a broader set of opportunities than their parents may have had. Most children go into a profession that they know that's related to someone they know or related to. It's hard to be what you've never seen. And so we need to bring parents along with that as well as students.
Yeah, Amanda, I want to get you on that because, Dr. Gray brought up the idea or the fact that so many students, even high school and younger, didn't have kind of the same opportunity to really focus on learning during this pandemic. And I mean, I think that's important. And it was obviously so much worse during COVID-19, or is, I guess, since we're not out of this yet. But that's not new to this time in our lives, right? That you have these outside pressures. So can you talk a little bit about that? And on this issue of family involvement and buy-in, how do you try to help thread that needle, because at the end of the day, families have to pay rent, they have to put food on their table, and often they need help from their kids to do that.
That's true. And at the same time, I think, as was earlier stated, the pandemic has only shone a light on already existing challenges in our education system. One other thing that it did, though, is it allowed families across the country to see what is happening day to day. Our families became the first teachers across the country. So we started to see, and myself included as a parent of 2 children in schools right now, to see what is my child learning, what is it aimed to do, and what is expected of them. And I think that's where a real opportunity lies for families to really become engaged now that we know so much more about what happens day to day in our classrooms. And so I think you're starting to see the elevation of family voices. And, I think unfortunately in some of the spaces it's become quite political for various issues due to the pandemic. But at the same time, this is a rare opportunity where families have been able to see what is it that is most important for our family. What are the hopes and dreams of our families for our children, and how do we see the education system currently addressing that? And what do we need to do to engage and have a voice and be at the table? I often say that it's no longer just administrators and teachers and students. Families now are part of the equation and the solution. So I'm really excited about this point in time to put a little bit of a positive spin on where we're at with the pandemic, is that families are aware, they're ready to engage. We have to activate them. And folks like us who are doing the work need to pull the chair up and make sure that family voices are part of the decision-making process for all stages of the educational experience of our children.
Yeah. Michelle, that is also important, so that means then the support needs to be there for these families and kids, and not just like moral support, right? But actual financial support, opportunities like community college as an entry point, so that not everybody has to make that call. Can you talk a little bit about how you're approaching those issues and what gaps there are that you're really looking to fill?
That's a really great point, because you can be prepared and supported to apply for college, and if there's no financial aid, you're not going to college, right? If you can't afford it, there's no opportunity, no matter how talented you are. And so nationally, it's important to double the Pell. We heard from our representative as we kicked off today's session. We're talking about closing equity gaps that exist. Well, let's close the equity gap that exists in terms of access to resources and support students with the highest need. In states across the nation, they are still distributing financial aid based on merit instead of need. This tends to reward those who are already wealthy and can afford to go to a state college and university. In California, we have pushed for a lot of incredible reforms to expand access to the Cal Grant, which is our state financial aid program, and ensure that we take away, for example, age limitations to using Cal Grant. We know that more and more adults are going back to college or going, part-time as they're working and raising a family. And so we need to be conscious that the new traditional student is typically older than what we've ever imagined and needs more resources and support, whether it's through employer contributions to education, state financial aid based on need, and federal aid that doubles the Pell and ensures that student lending is affordable, and that we provide, some parameters around what institutions can access federal student aid. We know that Latinos and Black students are targeted by predatory career colleges that often offer no value at all and leave our students worse off than they were. That's really impossible to imagine. You think you get an education, you can't possibly be left worse off. But at some of these institutions, they don't provide any quality, any workforce value, and students are left holding the bag with debt. So ensuring accountability for those institutions and obviously providing loan forgiveness for students who are trapped in that kind of situation is necessary.
Dr. Gray, is this something y'all are working on at Keene as well? I would imagine so.
Oh my gosh, I'm just like, I can't wait to jump in. To his point, to Michelle's point, to Amanda's point, all of these are innovations and programs and supports that we are putting in place here. Lydia brought up the importance so much about the family, and what brings us great joy at Kane, and what is the cornerstone of our work is this holistic approach, pre-K to 16. Our president's vision is really very expansive in terms of this new paradigm for the university. We have dual college programs. So what we are offering Latino and Black students, all students, but we are specifically focusing in our partner districts, uplifting the Latino and Black students in a way where they are able to start college before they even start high school. We had them on the campus. It starts with a vision, not just seeing, but you have to have a vision for your life. And so we brought them on the campus in the summer, and they took courses here before they were even in their own high schools. And the objective is that they will leave high school as graduates with 60 college credit. And this is really the way you begin to break the cycle of poverty off of Latino students' lives and their families. Because we're not just saying we want you to come to college, we're making it accessible. And we're giving you all of the supports that are necessary. So some may say, well, that's great for the higher performing students. But I mentioned that we have Supera. Carlos Rodriguez is the lead of that. And obviously, as a Latino, now they see themselves. That's for the first year student. Then we have a little bridge in between called Project Adelante. And in Project Adelante, we have some partner school districts where they are still in high school. But again, it starts with the vision. We want them to see themselves here. How do you see yourself in college? We put you in at the university, and we give you rigorous coursework, but we also give you the supports. Additionally, we bring the families in. We just had a wonderful family day last Saturday where families were creating compacts and vision boards. And one of our staff members here, one of our assistant directors, she was translating in Spanish, and their faces, so when they heard Sonia Irizarry speaking in a hard Puerto Rican accent, their faces just lit up because they were like, you planned not just for my child, but for me. And it is so important that we continue to engage and put this safety net around the whole family, the caregivers, because that's really how we break the cycle of poverty off of Black and Latino communities.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to go to Q&A from the audience in a minute, but I have one more question for Lydia. Just a reminder to folks, if you have questions for our panel, please put them in the chat now, and I'll be going to those. Lydia, as all three of our other panelists were speaking, I flashed back to my first experience as an intern in the private sector. I was right out of college. I was at the LA Times, and I looked around the room, and like 90% of the people there were basically rich. Like they had all had these previous unpaid internships. I mean, in my case, this was in media, right? But and it just struck me that like myself and a couple other girls were the only ones there who, not that I didn't have family support, and I did, and I was definitely in a better spot than some of my peers, but I just wonder, how do you deal with that? Because the truth is, there's a lot of people who were born on third base, right, in our society. And it's not like when you assess somebody that you know all those things necessarily. So can you talk a little bit, how are you all thinking about that problem and how to make sure that it's not just a room full of people that already had the advantages when you do internships or outreach?
Sure. So first, I think it's making sure that we as industry are very clear about what skills and abilities students need to have to get and keep a job in one of our companies. And that's whether it's a small company, medium-sized company, a large company. There's work that we can do to better work with our higher education partners, to work with training providers, to work with guidance counselors to say, this is what we need students to know and be able to do in order to work at IBM, in order to be a cybersecurity specialist, in order to be fill in the blank. I think where you hit the nail on the head is that students who are coming from more affluent backgrounds have access to this information in a way that students who may be first generation college going students don't know. They don't know how to select their courses. They don't understand why you may be, selecting all electives, and you can't do that, right? You've got to make sure that the courses you select are going to create a pathway for you to be in, to complete college and to get a job. The other thing I would say is, while we're working on, as a nation, on expanding Pell and expanding opportunity to finances that allow students to get and stay in higher ed, we also need to work on what are those equivalencies. So we're offering through Skills Build free access to training that's aligned to the careers that we have at IBM and that are industry standardized. Those equivalent credits that we need to work on as the private sector, so that students who get our training can cash those in for college credit, so that they can take that and it's meaningful in the marketplace, whether that's the higher ed marketplace or the job marketplace. We don't have a 4-year straight path through for higher ed anymore. We have multiple doors. Students come in out of high school. They might go to community college for a while. They may move around and get credits from different places. So they need education learner records. Electronic records. We need to think more holistically about how we get people in and through to meaningful employment and family sustaining wages. We're trying to do that work at IBM. We're working with partners to do it, but I think there's a lot more that we can do, particularly from the private sector side, to make sure our expectations are clear.
Awesome. All right, I do have some audience questions. I don't know what happened there. Questions. And I'm not sure who this is the best for, but one of our audience members wants to ask about resources for undocumented students, particularly those with asylum status. I don't know, Michelle or Amanda, if one of you wants to jump in.
Well, in California, thankfully, our state has included undocumented and documented students in the Cal Grant program. And so students can fill out the California DREAM Act to ensure that they have access to resources, and they can get the resources they need and are eligible for based on income status in our state. Amanda, I don't know if you want to speak to some of the federal opportunities or lack thereof so far.
I actually don't think I'm the best position to respond to that with the best answers. Yeah.
Well, let's stick with you, though. Maybe you have an answer to this. Have there been any changes over the past 10 to 15 years to the way ESL classes are taught in K-12 or other education?
I think our education system is still fraught in terms of and very fragmented in terms of how we support English learners. We've gone from eliminating bilingual education to then bringing to sort of resurrecting it. But I think things like sheltered English immersion, those types of programs don't go far enough. And so I do think we have a lot of work to do in this regard, and I don't know that we've seen a lot of sort of countrywide real shifts around supporting English learners. I do think there are pockets, though, of innovation, dual language schools and others that I think need to get a second look, and we need to see how we let those flowers bloom more to serve more English language learners.
Dr. Gray, do you have any thoughts on that? And one thing I've noticed being a public school parent is that even in a place like San Francisco, where we do a pretty good job of some of that immersion and other teaching, it's hard sometimes to bridge the communities. So if you have a school with like half the kids being taught, as English learners and half just being mainstreamed, it's hard to kind of like get the parents together and to make that feel like a community.
Yes, I think Amanda has raised excellent points in terms of some of the challenges that we're still seeing and we need to overcome. One in particular, Hammond talks about this often, is the funds of knowledge. There seems to be this vacuum in terms of educators understanding the value and the contributions that Latino and Black students bring into the classroom. And unfortunately, in many instances, they are viewed as deficient or not valued. And unfortunately, that then it translates into that student not feeling positive about the contributions that they can make in the classroom. When we highlight language, dual languages, not only does it empower the student that speaks more than one language, but it empowers the student that's monolingual in terms of the acquisition of two languages. It is so critically important because we understand how language and culture are inextricably linked to one another, that you have to embrace that. And this is where the culturally relevant teaching is critical. Having literature that looks like the students in the classroom is so important. When they see abuela in the text, they're like, oh my gosh, they jump off the page. And we have to also figure out ways to get that kind of content to families. So we are educating the families and caregivers along with the students. And this is where I would like to see the future of dual language instruction going. It has to be more than just a commitment to translating notification to parents. The other thing is this idea of parent involvement. I am hopeful and I look forward to post-COVID where we start changing what we view as parent engagement. Parent engagement doesn't mean you just come to back to school night and you show up for parent teacher conferences. Our parents were wonderfully engaged during COVID because they didn't have a choice. And we had to think innovatively about how to bring them into that space. Technology allowed us to do that. And I hope that we continue to do that and think differently about how we will continue ongoing conversations with our families.
Yeah. All right. We have one final question before we go to individual. Lydia, a question about how are you addressing the STEM gap? I thought that would be a good question for our IBM rep here.
Sure.
Anything you guys are doing around that? Yeah.
Yeah, well, so our P-TECH schools, we have close to 200 of those in the United States and more outside of the United States. And through our Skills Build program, which is both for students and for adults, is really how we're addressing the gap. Across IBM, we do so much more. We have partnerships with HBCUs to establish cybersecurity centers so that we can be training students who wouldn't in the past have had an opportunity to access those careers or that content from experts. We are looking at more ways to reach out to HSIs and MSIs to get opportunities for students to come to IBM, but our training platforms that we're making available for free are for everyone. And we really, on the corporate social responsibility team, are focused on identifying students and nonprofits working with learners who have traditionally been marginalized by the education system. So that's who we are really focused on reaching to expand opportunity. And we have internships, we have apprenticeships. I'd say one other thing, well, we're looking at the browning of America and expanding opportunity and leveraging the education system we have and all the pieces of it. We need to rethink career and technical education and using that as an access to STEM careers and not thinking about it as vocational ed. There are so many opportunities to do coding and STEM and other things in those pathways.
Totally. All right. This has been amazing. I have to ask you all for your closing remarks, and we're going to keep it short, couple sentences, but I'll stick with you, Lydia. What's your dream for the future around this issue of educational equity for Latinos? What do you hope to see?
I hope to see students being able to dream their biggest dream for themselves, and we have the systems, the supports, and when necessary, the money for them to do it. That the system is not the barrier, that the only thing stopping them from getting where they want to go is them just not continuing to push. And so I think, we're doing our little part now. It's going to take all of us working on it, and we need to take every slice of the system and say, is this working for our Latino students? And if it isn't, what should we be doing differently, and how can we change it?
Awesome. Dr. Gray, what's your hope?
My hope is that we continue to have ongoing conversations like this one, but that the conversations go beyond talk into action. And Kane University is a Hispanic serving institution. And so, Lydia, shameless plug, we would love to work in partnership, but working in partnership in tandem with other organizations that are focused in the same work. Thank you so much.
See a partnership and a follow-up panel later. Amanda, what are your hopes?
My hope is that at all levels of the education system and across the education system, that we truly can become more representative of our students and families, and that our families therefore feel supported, and that our students feel like they can achieve their dreams through the support of those who understand our communities, who are in decision-making roles, and that all our children can see themselves in those roles in the future.
Last but not least, Michelle.
I think Latino education equity for me looks like this. It looks like a world, a state where every young Latino child has access to preschool and a good quality K-12 education that prepares him or her for college. That every state investment looks at how it is spending its money to support Latino student success very intentionally. That our schools and colleges reflect the rich diversity of our nation in order to create a strong sense of well-being, and that proportionately to their numbers in the population, Latino students earn degrees and are in fields, whether it's STEM or otherwise, as in the same numbers or exceeding the numbers of their population. That's what equity would look like, and I think our hope and work is to make that happen.
Well, I want to say thank you to our amazing all-female kick-ass panel today. You guys were fabulous, and I feel really lucky to have been asked to do this. Thank you also for all the important work that y'all are doing. And thank you for attending CHCI's Leadership Conference. We're going to ask our audience to keep tweeting about it and our panelists. You can share your thoughts at hashtag CHCIHHM21. We have a full day of sessions ahead, so make sure to check out those upcoming sessions on the Latino vote, Latinos and COVID-19, and a session on developing bonds in adversity for Latino children and families. That's all coming up later this afternoon. Thank you so much to our panelists and audience, and have a great day.